Good evening and welcome to the Logos broadcast. It is Sunday, the 15th of September, and in Ireland it's about 8:15. I'm joined tonight by Graham Canton in Alabama and Philip Swanson, who's up in New York. And we haven't done one of these for a good while, but we actually have a huge amount to talk about. So I'm really excited to get stuck into this. Lads, thanks a million for coming on. Philip, can you maybe just give us a real quick update on your new line of work and kind of a couple of changes that have happened since last time you were on the Logos broadcast?
Yeah, so I'll be up at a farm. I've started working part-time on a farm run by an Orthodox fellow that's at my parish. It's an organic vegetable and chicken farm, so I'm there part-time right now as a unpaid intern, and I'll be going there full-time coming May. And so it's really just the chance to sort of live this symbolic life based on these patterns ingrained in reality that I've always been trying to do these past few years in an intentional community. And so yeah, I'm excited to finally do this.
So basically, how long had this kind of symbolic notion of doing this kind of work been in your head up until now that it's actually happening, would you say?
Um, I mean, really, since I left the homeless shelter in New York, right? You had this sort of intentional community, you had this environment built in, um, uh, a schedule based on certain patterns, right? Of okay, we have the structures of prayer, and then from that flow the structures of work, and then meal times, and all of it's obviously basically, all it's based in sort of communal living. I left that and had to go back to blue blobbly land, and it's been rough. That's been years, and I always wanted to get back to something like that. Couldn't really find it in the quote unquote real world, the quote real world, um, if you will, as if that's really true. And so I was looking around for something like this. Wanted to be able to work with my hands. Want to be live in community. Have a lot of time for prayer, for study, and to be with my wife and son more throughout the day, rather than this fake sort of hashed together factory working environment that this hellhole we've basically created. That we're kind of piecemealing together. And when people have mental breakdowns, we're like, "Oh, it's normal. It's normal. We just need more medicines." And so finally, it's like, okay, I can get away from all that crap and live the life that I want to live. So it's great, man.
Yeah, that's a very well summed up. Graham, you've done basically the opposite, and you've joined the corporate monolith, uh, and you've started. Obviously, I'm saying all this tongue in cheek, up to a point, but maybe you could tell us a bit about your latest developments, in terms of work and yeah, what's going on for you.
So, what a question. So, I had been living an extremely frugal lifestyle pretty much since 2021 when I separated myself from my house. I don't want to say moving out because that doesn't do the magnitude of the event justice. And I went back to school and acquired a modest amount of debt, and I worked for my dad for a while, doing side jobs here and there. For one of his enterprises, and that gave me just enough money to get by, and also just enough time to live frugally enough to still be idealistic about the world. And I was just presented with an opportunity to have a sales position, um, which is great because I just graduated college and my degree was in psychology. And so I see that as a not unmeaningless way to apply what I learned to the real world on the ground. And the job has also given me an opportunity, sales in particular, to apply my personality in a way that isn't arbitrary. And, if being outgoing and extroverted for most of a person's life is a quasi-arbitrary personality trait, but now I feel like there's an opportunity for me to get paid to be the way that I am. And that kind of synergy I feel like is very important for people to have in a career. Um, like Philip's life, for example, his change is going to allow him a lot more time to think and view the world in a unique way that's very hands-on and that makes sense. and it's a good framework. And so I'm kind of like on a similar path where I get to apply myself to the world in a unique and exciting way. I don't intend to do sales forever, but this will be the first time in my life that I will have money, like enough more money than I have to spend in a month. And that's a big deal because now I feel like I actually have the liberty to have dreams. Whereas beforehand, there was always a little bit of guilt around having dreams because how can you really plan for something when you don't even know how to imagine the resources necessary? So having a surplus of money, especially still being young, single, basically a bachelor, and carrying over my frugal lifestyle from the last 3 years is going to allow me to have unique plans, fun plans. And I just got back from vacation at a family member's house across the country, and she has like a farm and a side house, a shack with chickens. And I stayed there for a while, and I really got to have a good welcoming exposure to a less industrial lifestyle, which is something I've always dreamed about, but I've never actually been able to experience it. So I always felt a little bit LARPy, being like, screw stroads, screw traffic lights, all of this. I just want to see big trees. And going to this property across the country made me realize that it's not LARPing. This is actually something that I felt deeply in my soul. And so I have to pay attention to it. Now I have the money to pay attention to it. And that's pretty much where my update ends.
Okay, nice one. So I suppose it sounds kind of corny, but I wanted to bring up the theme of new beginning and all that kind of thing in this broadcast because we haven't done one of these for a while. I'd love to actually try and do this a bit more regularly. And Graham, you wrote a blog in your fledgling Substack, which is actually very good. If anyone is curious, Irano Geist on Substack. But you wrote a piece on napping, and I was just talking to someone today, and he referred me to a poem, a prose poem by a French former socialist Catholic convert, and I'm gonna butcher the pronunciation of his name, but his name is Charles de. I think that's how you say his name. And it was basically a meditation on sleep. So I'd love to read a bit of that. Graham, if you have anything to say on napping, I'd love you to actually bring that up again. And then Philip, you might kind of talk, if you don't mind, about some symbolism when it comes to sleep, death, and rebirth, and so on. So here we go. So this is from The Surrender of Sleep by Charles Peggy. Sorry, I said his name wrong earlier. All right. He whose heart is pure sleeps, and he who sleeps has a pure heart. This is the great secret to being as indefatigable as a child. To have that strength in your legs that a child has, those new legs, those new souls, and to start over every morning, always new, like the young, like the new. Hope. Yes, they tell me that there are men who work well and who sleep poorly, who don't sleep. What a lack of confidence in me. It's almost worse than if they worked poorly but slept well, than if they worked but didn't sleep. Because sloth is no worse a sin than anxiety. In fact, it's even a less serious than anxiety. And then despair, and then a lack of confidence in me. By the way, this is a translation from French, so the language is a bit awkward. I'm not talking, says God, about those men who don't work and who don't sleep. Those men are sinners, it goes without saying. They get what they had coming to them. Great sinners. All they have to do is work. I'm talking about those who work and who don't sleep. I pity them. I'm talking about those who work and who thus, in doing this, are following my commandment. Poor children. And who, on the other hand, don't have the courage, don't have the confidence, don't sleep. I pity them. I hold it against them. A bit. They don't trust me. As a child lays innocently in his mother's arms, thus do they not lay innocently in the arms of my providence. They have the courage to work. They don't have the courage to do nothing. They possess the virtue of work. They don't possess the virtue of doing nothing, of relaxing, of resting, of sleeping. Unhappy people They don't know what's good. They look after their affairs well during the day, but they don't want to give them to me to look after during the night. As if I weren't capable of looking after them for one night. He who doesn't sleep is unfaithful to hope. And that's the greatest infidelity, because it's an infidelity to the greatest faith. Okay, lads, I don't know, did you zone out, or did all of that kind of resonate, or what? But Graham, do you have any thoughts on that kind of that excerpt from that poem? And maybe if you want to tie it into your Substack, or maybe not.
I mean, I think the best way to go forward is to bring it into the Substack, and then for Philip to discuss, the deeper meanings of resurrection. But the thing I mentioned in my Substack is that sleep it's the permitted ability to romanticize disappearing into nothingness, right? It's the good end of, shall we say, you know, deleting yourself, right? It's the good alternative. It's the thing you do with the hope of resurrecting, right? It's a very humble submission to a powerful force like slumber, because you have no control when you're sleeping. And so after a hard day, you can be tempted to give up in a number of ways, but sleep provides you the rest necessary to get up and do it again. So it is a type of death, and then it is a hope and a resurrection, i.e., waking up. So it's very ritualistic. That's what I mentioned as one of the symbolic elements of sleeping, or in the entry I wrote, napping.
Philip, can you come in there?
Yeah, I mean, Graham's right in terms of submitting yourself to something to lose control, right? Because that's how sleep is presented in the scriptures. It's always presented in connection with death, with an encounter with something. It's either presented as a connection and an encounter with death, or something otherworldly, right? Because what two things happen in dreams, or excuse me, what two things happen in sleep? It's either death or dreams, right? Dreams of something either above or below, right? You see these dreams of Jacob, for example, of Abraham, of Saint Joseph, right? And they're all encountering these beings either above or below them, right? But the most important thing is obviously death. In the poem, it talks about the courage to sleep and people not trusting God. So the structure that's sort of set up here is that you have, the first commandment is to work, right? To be fruitful and multiply. That involves work, obviously, to fill the earth and subdue it, right? So it involves this type of work, this ordering, this naming, this control over something. Doesn't necessarily mean a bad control over something, but a control over something, right? And sleep is a descent into death, right? Because the head no longer has control over the body. That which is above no longer has control over that which is below it. And so this is why in the Gospels, right, you don't ever see Christ sleep. When does he sleep? Well, he sleeps at his passion on the cross, right? But it's in that sleep, right? He's the poet the poem that we just read talks about sleep in terms of right, trust, in terms of courage, in terms of hope, right? Well, hope for what? If sleep is connected to death, then what the heck do we have to hope for? Well, we have what comes after, which is resurrection, right? Which Christ shows in the pattern, something new, something creative comes at night, right? It's when things can grow, can flourish, can blossom, right? We think that, oh no, sleep is going on into death. That's a scary thing. Of course it is. But that's when things secretly sort of happen. It's why all these plants, you see it in the created world, right? All of these plants, you go to sleep, you wake up and wow, look at all these plants that have sprung up, right? So it's this ingrained pattern to everything. We just have to have the courage to do it, because it is a scary thing to lose control. It is a scary thing for the head to lose control over the body. We want to be in control of things. But at the end of the day, we have to let go of that, descend down into death in order to be made better than what we are now, and at every sort of level, right? Even in terms of like a metabolical healing sort of thing, right?
One of the things people who, or let's say, are in our game or whatever, might be familiar with New Polity, and one of the things they talk about a lot is being able to rest and being able to feast, right? And there being a time for doing those things. And Philip, one thing I've heard you talk about a lot is I want to live a life that's in keeping with the seasons, or that's kind of reflective of the seasons of the year and the changing of those patterns. And something obviously that we're used to is a timetable that doesn't take into account the time of year. It's like you get up, say, at 6 o'clock or whatever, and you're working at 7:30, and that doesn't take into account the daylight or any of that kind of thing. Could you maybe talk a little bit about that contrast uh, in what your life ideally might be like, let's say, in your farming LARP or whatever, or like actual, you know what I mean, integration into that.
Yeah,
As it relates to time of year, I just want to hear more like something about time. There's a time for this, time for, you know what I'm saying?
yeah. I mean, like that's the thing. It's like, okay, winter's coming up. There's going to be less work on the farm. That means there's going to be less food for me to have. Well, I don't really have a normal job anymore. So, well, what the hell am I going to have to do? Well, now I'm going to have to go out and catch things. I'm going to have to fast more, which is which is what the church gives us, right? This is why we have a huge fast during the winter, right? The winter Lent, basically, the nativity fast, right? And so I'm going to now, right now that I don't have a normal job, last year I could do, it's like, oh, okay, well, I can just go to the grocery store and get some fish for Saturday and Sunday, and that's all fine and dandy. Well, I'm not going to have the money to do that anymore. So I'm going to have to go and catch fish, right? I'm going to have to go cook and clean fish myself, not have it nice in a plastic BPA package at the grocery store. Um, right. So in a way, it's beneficial, but it's also a scary process, right? Now I wake up in the morning, it's like, okay, what are we going to eat today? It's a question most people don't have. Most people don't even think about that, right? People used to think about it all the time because that's all they had. But now that's something I have to now take into consideration. It's like less work, more fasting. Okay, well now my life is more in conformity with the church calendar. It's not just like why why am I fasting? It's like, well, I'm working less and therefore I can fast less. So all of these levels are now connecting with one another, and I can actually sort of enter into it. And then when Christmas comes, right, for example, then I can really go all out and participate in that feast because I've been saving lots of money. I've been eating a lot less food. I've been not doing as much work out in the field, right? And now and preparing and saving up for that rejuvenation, for that, right? Because winter is a descent into death. The whole world dies together, right? And then when the light comes, right, it's like a little resurrection, right? The light has come. Christmas takes place at the time of the solstice, and so now things start to come back. No, solstice is it's not the right word. It's the equinox, whatever it is. Everything comes back up to, and it's the winter solstice. Everything comes back up together. So it's like, okay, I get to plug into that for the first time in my entire life. I've been alive for 26 years, and this is the only time I've ever been able to do it.
Graham, you were just up in Washington State, as you just said, and you talked about light pollution. You sent us a link to I think you said something like the vast majority of people have never actually seen the glory of God's creation, or something like that. And obviously, you said that, I think, probably having been struck in a novel way by that very thing. So, can you talk about your experience over the last couple of weeks and what kind of revelations um, might have occurred to you?
Yeah, I mean, most of what I reflected on while I was there was that much of what people think could be the case is the case when it comes to what's lacking in the environment. There are a lot of shows and little mini communities and Pinterest boards where people idealize farming and food and living off the land. And this is especially a phenomenon in far right and far left circles is living off the land and effing off the government. And I mean, I probably gonna have to cut that. I don't really have a substantial reflection on light pollution. I mean, just kind of a banal thing to reflect on,
But
frankly.
creation in general, it's you were white pilled on that far. So
Well,
like,
something
why
something
was
that
that?
did something that did strike me was the magnitude of the environment, and how much you have to trust that something's going to be okay, even when you have no reason to, and you don't even know what it is that you should be afraid of. All you know is that in the place where I was, everything was giant, foreign, and functioned in a way unfamiliar to me. beaches that are like not sand, but like sizable pebbles, giant evergreens and conifers and, maple trees that fall and animals that behave in ways you're not used to, and crossing over to fields where there are just thousands of rabbits, and it's all very foreign. And Philip would say this is appropriate considering it's the edge of the world, it's the end of the world, and things get more crazy, right? The further out you go. And that's what I experienced all the way across the country. I don't really have anything substantial to say about
Okay, I
what
can cut.
something that I do
Keep
have to
going.
say. I wanted to add on to the sleeping thing is what I wanted to add on to. But well, so in the poem that you read aloud, it mentioned a baby in a mother's arms sleeping. That's a type of submission. Philip mentioned submission as well. Christ sleeping on the cross. This is submission. It's a trust in sleep, not just trust in going to sleep, but trust in the process of doing it. And there actually is one other instance in scripture I can think of where there's sleeping and a huge moral to be had, and it's Christ asleep in the Sea of Galilee during the tempest. And all of his disciples were in the boat and they were tweaking out because Christ was asleep, and it was a storm unlike anything they'd ever seen. Now, a lot of these guys were fishermen, right? So they've probably seen their fair share of storms, but they're afraid, and they're even extra afraid with Christ in the boat, which shows the magnitude of the storm, right? And so this is a little bit like being afraid to go to sleep, right? But in another direction, the disciples were afraid that Christ, who could control the storm, was asleep. Well, why would they be afraid of that? And that's just a reflection I had on that.
Yeah, that's a good correction, Graham, because I did say that Christ never sleeps. That is the one exception. That is the one time he does fall asleep, right? And well, why are they terrified? Well, what's the immediate thing he does afterwards? Like, oh, it's all right, guys. He immediately calms the storm, says, "Oh, ye little faith," and shows his power as God, right? The obviously his ultimate sleep does not come until he's on the cross, and then he really shows his power as God.
Okay, lads, just gonna pause there. Did either of you have a chance to quick flick through that poem Begin? Did you see that?
Yeah.
Did you like it?
Sorry, yeah.
Okay, I could bring that up now, or I could wait till after. Wait a bit later. But basically, if I don't do that now, I was thinking, but we mightn't have anything to say in it. But maybe we could just kind of skim through. Uh, but yeah, maybe you're not following it. But the Trump Camelot stuff, because that's basically topical right now. Maybe you don't want to talk about it. But maybe the whole point is that like we don't even care. You know what I mean? Um,
I'm having a hard time firing on all cylinders on this subject.
okay, that's fine.
The
Philip,
Trump.
how about the shooting? No, it's too late. Maybe we
Yes.
kind of missed that boat.
Yeah.
It's not
Yeah,
fresh.
the Trump thing, the Trump Kamala thing. I don't know. Maybe we can keep this footage. We can. Why we're not interested in talking about it.
Yeah, basically, here's something I think is interesting. Is basically I personally was really interested 4 years ago. 8 years ago, I didn't really get the Trump thing or whatever, and now I'm basically off the chessboard or whatever. And I think a lot of people are kind of it's a kind of a that's a trend or whatever. People just kind of disengaging from the political system, and then it's like, why is that happening?
Mm.
Um,
Well, I'd say it's for the same reason that farming is important. So that's exactly why people are disengaging from the political system, is because it's too nationalized. It's not localized enough, right? And that's why, like when I was, this is something I did actually reflect on when I was at my aunt's house. Is even something as simple as eating eggs that were that I cracked that were from the backyard opened up another world that I couldn't have opened up on my own. I couldn't have forced it open. But there was something that clicked in my head whenever I cracked that egg that was enormous to me. And it was as enormous as the trees, the revelation of this egg came from a stone's throw from where I was sleeping, basically. And I picked apples from a tree in my backyard, right? And I think that carries over to politics in kind of a roundabout way, but ultimately people aren't they're becoming really not concerned with what politicians in the presidential office have to say. It's just a lot of it is important in the grand scheme, but people are starting to feel closed into their locales because they want to go and control what they can control, right? Feel like politicians aren't in control. They want to feel in control, but everything that's local these days is not in their control. It's industrial, it's from far away. Like, what do we have to do with the margaritas at Applebee's? Nothing. We don't have anything to do with that. So there's no infrastructure in place for people to actually care about their locale. And there's no infrastructure in place for people to feel like they actually have an important say in presidential elections. So people are tapping out.
And you don't have a say, obviously, in the presidential election because it's so vast in a very kind of, if not unnatural way, just hard to influence way. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
That's basically the case. Um,
Yeah. No,
yeah, Philip, how long? Well, maybe there isn't a simple answer to this question, but with politics and stuff, I'm sure Graham, you would say 2016, you were like wearing the MAGA hat and stuff, and then it's like 2020, you're kind of past that, let's say, you know, but still enjoying maybe the Trump chaos,
yeah,
and then
yeah.
and then but basically, Philip, my question to you is when did you maybe step off or turn off the politics or the news and stuff like that? Because I'm pretty
um,
sure you have done that.
oh yeah, I mean, like probably, I don't know, probably 2019, 2018, somewhere around that time. It got to a certain point where like you just don't really care anymore because you have these real problems in front of you. Like that's when I went to the homeless shelter in New York City. It's like there are people starving in front of me. And these guys get up here and they run their damn mouths. Yeah, Dada, hello. Come here, buddy. Uh, it's like, look, it's like, these people get up here, they run their damn mouths, and then you get things to take care of, right? You have people to take care of, like little babies. And it's like, okay, this is what's in front of me. This is what I have to take care of. This is my concern. It's not like, it's the homeless people who are in front of me. It's my community that's in front of me, right? And the problem is that we have a highest identity, right, as Christians, and then we have the lower identity at the communal level, your parish, your family, whoever, right? The political spectrum sort of plugs itself in this very awkward way, right? It's like, no, because because what happens? You have Father Stephen DeYoung was talking about this recently. After the 30 Years' War, when you have people killing each other of different religions, they come up with an idea. They say, well, instead of being united by religions, let's be united by nation states. Well, I'm a German and a Catholic. I'm a German and I'm Protestant. I'm German and thus and such. Same thing with the French, Italian, whoever, right? British. And that awkwardly inserts itself. And so now these people, right, they prop themselves up, they gain more and more power, and then it really reached its sort of final straw with the boomers. The boomers are really the last people who actually place their identity in these things, right? Who care about the temple to Abraham Lincoln, right? Who care about the monolithic, God structure to George Washington, right? Like, I don't give, like, who gives a shit about that, right? Okay, there's got to be a way for us to acknowledge our leaders and sort of respect them as royalty, but they're not appointed by God, right? As the kings of old would have been. They have tried to replace God, which is an even worse thing. And so once you start to wake up and realize that, right? Like once you start to wake up and realize that, that doesn't matter anymore because they're just going to keep talking. And then you realize like the power structures that have set these things up, you can't, because people our age, right? What's our biggest struggle? Well, we can't pay for a house. We can't pay for whatever. And you have the boomers, well, you should just work 50 hours a week and retire with your and it connects back to the farming, your 501, your 401k and your pension fund. Why don't you just have those things and you'll be really good and, forgive student loans. I paid for college. I worked. It's like, well, yeah, no shit, because college cost $3,000 when you went. And so, but where did all these things come from? Well, it comes from the federal government, right? All these problems stem from the Federal Reserve and printing all this money, and now we're in debt. And so it's like, okay, you've put us in the debt in this first place. You promised us these things, right? You've set yourself up as these gods, and it's fallen flat on its face. So how am I going to take care of myself? Well, it's not by putting my trust in you anymore, right? It's by going back to a way of life where people would support each other, because the federal government, it's not supporting anyone. It's leading to the collapse of all of these other structures. And when people realize that the structure that they have propped up to replace all of these other ones, it doesn't work.
And government will always fail when it behaves that way because
Yeah.
the government is, in order to make itself in control, which it has to do if it's going to say it's the highest order in business, not God, it has to provide material things for you. That's what it has to do because it's fundamentally a material phenomenon, government. And so when it stops providing these material things, or rather gives you space to provide your own material things, that's when people become jaded. And I think people are becoming jaded because they're realizing the whole system is fundamentally elementary, right? Like engaging in these politics, engaging in the national conversation against like the two suspiciously only present parties. And this is becoming very jading to people. They realize that they don't care about their kids. The fertility rate is reflected by the development of society, or the low fertility rate rather, right, is indicative of a nation that doesn't really care about people, right? Because the foundation of all people is that we can make more, right? We plant a tree and we expect that it'll grow even when we're dead. But the government's not even doing that. It's looking to something else. And on the boomer thing, I saw a funny tweet a couple weeks ago that said that what baby boomers did was basically the thing where, you live in a house with people and you use up all the toilet paper but the last little piece, and then you leave it on the roll for someone else to change. Like you should change or wipe with it, but you leave it anyway. And that's a little bit like what boomers have done with wealth. And I was talking to my pop about this the other day. This is exactly what's happening with supermarkets and farmers' land, right? Private enterprises are now becoming the number one owners of farmland in the United States, and this is taking away wealth from the community. What's that? Because the farmers have hundreds of acres of land. Publix comes in and makes an offer they can't refuse, so to speak. They sell the land, and now money is not local. Wealth is not local. You can't produce anything on that land, and that tears people away from their identity of where they belong.
And actually, what you're saying about the local, right? If you're giving, because it's not like the federal government doesn't give people anything, right? Strictly speaking, there are obviously people who depend on the government for their resources, but that's not a conversation that's done on a local level. So there's something, I don't want to say parasitical, but it's hard. It's not really a relationship that's kind of reciprocal in any meaningful way.
Right.
It's not like we're all sharing. It's not like we're all kind of pitching in as people with a shared identity, because how you can't really have a really shared identity with 300 million people,
No, of course
So
not.
so it's
Yeah.
it's yeah, and then as a result, yeah, basically there's not a reciprocal, there's not a kind of a give and take when it comes to that kind of thing. I mean, would you guys think that's fair to say?
Yeah, no, it's completely disconnected from
Or
any
like
sort
if your neighbor was giving you, say, like if you literally depended on your neighbor, this is I guess my point. If you depended on your neighbor for a dig out this winter, it would be natural that you would help him out in kind, or your wife might mind his kids or whatever. It's something like that. But we don't have that kind of conversation. And so yeah, there's no reason not to just abuse the welfare system. And then that in itself will actually destroy your life.
Yeah, and people
Do you know what I
already
mean? It's like it's not like these people are like it becomes to the point where, I mean, you guys know yourselves the whole fatherlessness thing. Um, that's absolutely exploded since the government has started giving people money for not working.
yeah.
So it's kind of a vicious feedback loop. But Philip,
Yeah,
go on there.
yeah, like you said, like I mean, the fatherlessness issue has become. It goes back to the very issue of okay. I mean, it's this meta pattern, right? You have okay, well, religion is this problem. Therefore, we need to create something new. Therefore, government will be God. We can't entirely escape the religious lingo and religious rituals and religious symbolism. So we build temples to Abraham Lincoln and George Washington and all these people. Thomas Jefferson, and then we, end up revolting against those gods as well as they overthrow God. Now we're overthrowing them because Jefferson's a racist, Washington's a racist, Abraham Lincoln, well, he's got all sorts of problems, so we can talk about that later. Right. And then what does the government now do? Well, so now they go down one level and they're like, okay, well, now we can insert ourselves into these communities and then we can replace the fathers, right? The actual fathers by, well, welfare checks, right? So the fathers check out. So this is the thing they've done. They've destroyed things. They've tried to destroy that which is above. Ultimately, you can't do that. And they now are in the process of, because of that, right, that seeps down into what's beneath them, and then it leaches into the communities, and now the communities are being utterly obliterated.
So
It's a scary system.
so yeah, basically the state tries to become God, which ipso facto, prima facie, uh, is impossible. So
Yeah,
it's gonna collapse basically.
yeah,
Is
it's gonna.
like
Well, what is a
necessarily
nation
it
anyway,
cannot
right?
work. Go on,
Yeah,
Graham.
Like a nation is a machine of subsidiarity, is what it's supposed to be. It's supposed to give you something proportionate to what you give it, right? And so there was this quote from JFK, and it was like, or I'm pretty sure it was JFK. I'm a terrible civic citizen, but
Yeah, it
um,
was. I know what you're gonna say. It was JFK. Go on.
yeah, it's ask not what your nation can do for you, but what you can do for your nation, right? And that's a great quote relative to the state of the country now.
He actually
But what
just
it should actually,
for sorry to interrupt you, just for the because these words do matter. I think he said country and not nation, but go on.
well, did he say country or did he say nation?
Pretty certain
The
he said
distinction is
country.
important, but in this case, he's talking about the U.S.
Yeah,
yeah,
go
Ask
on.
not what you can do for the U.S. or what the U.S. can do for you, but what you can do for it. But in an ideal world, it's ask what you can do for it and it for you. It's not you don't have to choose. You shouldn't have to choose one, right? And that's why people used to go and die for their nation. They thought it was something sacred because it represented the people, right? But now it doesn't really represent the people. It represents a monolith that the people are submitting to, right? And it's like Philip was saying, it's made itself a God that we submit to, but this God isn't delivering us, anything godly, right? Godly things deliver us peace, and they deliver us something like almost untouchable. But we see what the nation is doing, and we watch the news, and we do all these things, and imagine if you had a live stream into the mind of God, right? Your head would explode and it would just be splat everywhere. And you're not supposed to understand something that's truly sacred. And so when we make nations into something that like sacred, we're losing a little bit of what God is supposed to actually be.
yeah.
So Philip, go on. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. So once again, it comes down to the difference between being ordained and appointed by God and participating in that, and completely replacing him. People think it's the same thing. It's like, oh, right of kings to rule, right? It's like there's a subtle difference there, because the king always had the mind, the identity of the nation, which was usually its religious functions, because civic and religious functions weren't really all that different in well, up until the Industrial Revolution, really the Protestant Revolution, right? All of these things were tied together. But that's the huge difference. It's the difference between being appointed by God and carrying those principles down and fulfilling those duties, and replacing God with something that's not God.
I don't know if we can kind of riff on this for a second, but I remember thinking it occurred to me one time. You know the way priests. I know you guys are now Orthodox and all, but people think of a Catholic priest and presumably an Orthodox one dressed in his clericals. Do you use the same terminology? Or what do you
Yeah,
call that?
sure.
So
Yeah, clerics. Yeah.
back in the day, back in the day, the lads were wearing the cassock, right? And you see a man wearing a cassock, and he's walking down the street, and you're like, oh my goodness, like this is. You literally see him, and you think this is out of this world or whatever, in a sense. And that's kind of the whole point. It's like this guy is ordained as he's not a god, obviously, but he's not a normal person. And so the priest, and then you've like, well, priests don't wear the clericals anymore. And we don't really respect the priests anyway, because as knowledge becomes more, uh, sorry, I'm a bit slow because I'm just tired. But anyway, as knowledge becomes more accessible to everyone, that's certain things aren't reserved to the priest that used to be. Where you guys can talk more about this, I'm sure, but priests used to basically be the only people who were quote educated, or the only people who could read the Bible or whatever. So it's like by definition they are in this elite priest class, right? But now it's like, well, everyone can learn about everything if they want. So why is the priest special? Aside from the religious convictions of people, right? So then COVID comes along, and it's like we still have these archetypes in our head of priest, like it's a deep it's a deep role, and then other people became the priest. Obviously, in a kind of a they weren't actual priests, but it was like Tony Fauci was like the head priest or whatever, like he was this kind of all-knowing, or kind and people talk about trusting the expert, but basically I had this like expert now as priest, and it's like whenever there's anything being discussed, it's like, well, we're going to get this person who's an expert in this thing, person who has a PhD in this thing, and those are our priests. I don't know. Do you guys have anything to say on that? It just really it really became clear in COVID, and it's kind of like Philip. You're saying we replace God with government. You could say you replace religion with science or whatever, and then you replace the priest with an expert.
Yeah, I mean, like that's the thing is you cannot entirely escape myths and stories, right? There's not like okay, it's like I'm a simple medieval peasant. The priest, tells me, whatever story he tells me about the Feast of the Dormition, right? The Theotokos is, learns from the angel Gabriel, and she delivered a palm. 3 days later she's going to die. The apostles come, they sing hymns. Christ comes, she dies. He takes her soul with him to heaven, and then they're doing a funeral procession, and a wicked Jew comes up, and the Archangel Michael comes and cuts off his hands. He repents, he's restored, becomes a Christian, and her body's taken up as well. It's like, okay, well, from a scientific perspective or whatever, that sounds absolutely ridiculous. But why do I believe it? Because somebody from above has told me that that's true. Somebody who I trust has told me that that's true, and I see the fruits of these things, right? I see the patterns of these things. That's how I know it's true. Well, the same thing can be applied to the science, like you said, or really anything, right? It's like the football. It could be the football coach. It could be the referee. It could be, well, he's an expert in these rules, so of course you have to listen to him. Right? People are still going to cry foul when their team doesn't win, but why do you believe these people? Right? There's no difference between the priest telling you this story and the scientist in the lab coat who has sort of this hidden, unaccessible knowledge to you. I don't have access to microscopes and telescopes and all these other fancy schmancy equipment. What is my belief in whatever scientific thing based on? Well, it's based on whatever the guy tells me, right? So you can try and take these things and pretend that religion is just this silly dress up thing that everyone does, right? It's like, well, why does the scientist have to wear a damn lab coat? He doesn't have to, technically. He can wear clown pants, right? In a Frosty the Snowman hat, but he doesn't because there's a ritual involved, right? People, they were the priest, they wear those funny hats. It's like, yeah, well, he's wearing this silly white coat. What's the difference? There's not much of a difference, right? And this is why like reductionism doesn't work. So it doesn't work because ultimately you can just reduce everything down to its parts. But there's more than just like, oh, guy in white lab coat looks under microscope, ha 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 ha. Right? I can reduce science to that if I want to. That doesn't make it true. And I think that's the thing. You can't get away from myth because that's how we structure our lives.
And I just want to clarify, obviously, I'm not saying that should go that saying, I'm not saying the priest is the only person allowed to be an expert. Obviously, we respect competence in respective domains where appropriate, but there's something, like you're saying, this hidden knowledge that like I don't have the right to question or whatever. And there's something, yeah, there's something untouchable about the priest, which I think we associate with the whole experts in science and things like that. Graham, do you have anything to say about any of that?
Yeah, I think people are really quick to ridicule the priest and to ridicule religion because that's exactly where the stakes are highest. I mean, that's where the stakes, people want to have the most control over the place where stakes are highest. And what we're seeing with people in lab coats, judges in uniforms, freaking whatever you guys have over there in the aisles with the wigs or whatever, like that's competence, ritual, and authority all look the same across the board, just in different ways. There's always going to be uniforms, there's always going to be titles, and there's always going to be someone who knows more than someone else. And the stakes are highest in religion, and that's why people kind of hate it these days. But they're very quick to participate in other things that are quasi-religious, right? This is a callback to my old fraternal order, quasi-religious forms, right? If it weren't for the fact that most of the people were kooky, this would be in public conversation. But the kookers back in 2020 were calling masks and freaking like the face shields sacramentals, and the vaccine was called a sacrament, right? And because they intuitively understood that you can't escape myth, like Philip said, it is everywhere. And just like the nap is a ritual. It's a type of laying down and dying, right? The bed is a sort of altar, right? You prepare the altar before the liturgy. You make up your bed, you get your bed ready before you lie down on it and die. And that's exactly what's going on in liturgy. You make up the altar, and then you put the host on, you consecrate it, and that's death. And then the consummation is the receiving of the sacrament, and you technically you receive the sacrament of sleeping when you wake up. And it's the same thing with the vaccination, right? There's an insertion and then there's a result. It's a sacrifice. That's what I think
Um,
about.
now, Graham, why do you say because the stakes are highest, that's why we ridicule it? Why is that? Why does that follow?
Well, ridicule, I think the ridicule actually proceeds from the fact that we know we can't control it, right? We feel like there's no participating in it. It's kind of like the thing with government, right? That's why we ridicule the national government, is because we feel like that's the thing we really should be able to participate fully in, but we can't give it our all. It's just too distant. And for many people, religion is just too distant.
Okay.
So the stakes are high, it's too far away, and that's a good recipe for ridiculing something, right? Just like a nerd in school, you know he's smarter than you, and you know he's worlds away from you in terms of what he's interested in. So you just make fun of the guy. It's the same thing. Strange things
Funny.
will be tested against incorporation, just like immigrants. Some will assimilate, some will not, and that's a protection mechanism. But the problem these days is that we've given people too much knowledge, right? So the protection mechanism against religion has failed because there should be a distance between the common plebs on the normal curve and people who know more and just objectively are better, right? That's why education is important. Priests are more educated for a reason. They should know more about that. So should a scientist. He should know more about health than, or about what, let's say a doctor. He should know more about health than you. And the minute we start trying to breach that sacred space between expert and non, that's whenever we start ridiculing something.
So the Zen has gone in and the radicalism is on full flow. I'd love to keep going here if you guys are down. So Graham, you've talked about uh I don't think you'll object to me saying this. I know you've changed since then anyway, but like a few years ago you would have been an unironic monarchist, right? And we recently met a guy in New Orleans who um he was like, yeah, I'm a monarchist or whatever, right? And you're like, yeah, that's such a LARP. And LARP, for people who don't know, is live action role play, isn't that right? That's what LARP stands for. And it's basically like you're pretending or whatever. And like as if you're playing a video game, you know? And so your thing about that was, and I've heard other people say this too about communism, but basically, yeah, it's a great system as long as I'm in charge, right? And
Exactly. Yeah.
and so Philip, you're talking about replacing the king who was ordained by God and so on. And I hate to be asking maybe this question because it's like maybe an annoying question because maybe there's no simple quick answer to it. But basically, what the hell form of government would you like to see? Or is that just a non-question because it's like, well, what the hell can you do about it anyway? You might as well just be local, local, local. But do you guys have an answer to that? Like, um, are you a monarchist? And if so, how the hell do you find a king or queen? Uh, and if not a monarchist, what are you? And yeah, maybe we don't even need to go there. Maybe we just move on. But I would like to hear if you have an answer.
Gramps, you want to go?
Yeah, so this isn't like so I don't even know if this is a real category. I would call myself a localist, right? I would say at heart I'm a distributist, right? I'm a big subsidiarity enjoyer. So I think that any authority that can be had more locally should not be, if you can put everyone in, like, no one should be controlling crops where I live if they're not living here. That's the best, I think it's a cardinal sin to have someone that's not a part of your people controlling your people. And so back in the day when nations actually meant something, you could have a king, say, okay, do this with your crops. And most people would be like, Well, that sucks, but it is what it is because, they're same religion, same people, same language, so on and so forth. But that's just not the case these days. And so I would say I feel best when authority is localized, for sure.
I would totally agree with Graham, especially now, sort of being able to live and plug into something like that now. Like, I hardly even use the grocery store anymore. Most of my food either comes from the farm or like food that the church that's donated to the church. Right, that's what I'm living off of, and it's better that way. I'll be honest, it's better that way. You love people more, right? You care about doing work for these people. It's like you think it's this some crappy odd job that I didn't care about the people who I was living, wasn't friends with any of them. You think I'm going to care? I'm going to show up and work hard for them? Absolutely not. Why would I? What do I have to gain from making rich people's houses look richer, who I have no idea who they are, right? That I don't get to participate in. It's not even just like a selfish thing, right? It's like, what can I actually contribute and give myself to make not only my life but the lives around me more fulfilling? How can I see what's being made more fulfilling in whatever, whatever job that I had in the past? I didn't really get to see that with very few exceptions, of course. Um, but I think that keeping it there, it enables human flourishing to a greater degree because people have each other's backs and people love each other. And are you really going to like turn your neighbor down and screw him over? Well, probably not, because you have to go to church with him, right?
Yeah.
That didn't really work that way. And if you did, what would happen? Well, usually what would happen was that peace would be made in the church, right?
Mhm.
Now what happens if you or somebody screws you over? You go to court to some faceless blue blood judge who's just looking at a bunch of rules, doesn't give a shit about you or the other guy, right? And then the
But it's
panel,
worse. It's worse than that because obviously you can get a lawyer who will kind of abuse the law or whatever
yeah.
in a kind of a profane way. It's not like that. It's not like neutral. It's
But
like
the
everyone you're trying to screw each other. You're suing this guy with no regard to what's actually right or whatever or just. But or no, that's obviously not always the case, but that can be the case a lot. That's
yeah.
why you've guys advertising. You know, if you're in a crash, sue the hell out of them, call me or whatever. But Philip, go
Yeah.
ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I'll call me, I'll take care of you. It's like, no, no, no. You're not going to take care of me. You're going to take care of getting me money, maybe. Like maybe that's what they'll do. But why do they want to give me money? Because it gives them lots of money, right? It makes them, then we all go our merry way. It's like that law, they can be friends with you all you want on the phone, but they're not going to invite you to their house for dinner. They don't give a shit about you.
Exactly right.
And
Justice is
even,
just money now. That's all it is.
yeah, they're not going to invite you over for dinner, right? And maybe this is a sort of a transition, but this is why I've come to the fact and realization. My wife told me she was reading a book. I don't know what book she got it from, but she said something I agree of. Money is less important than skills. Right? Skills are much more important to have than money, right? Because I can transfer those anywhere. I can take those anywhere, right? And I can make people's lives better with them, right? That's not to say money's bad, of course. It's potentiality, and as Graham's saying, it's hopefully it'll have a positive effect on what he's able to do, right? It can be used for good, of course. I'm not saying that it's just totally wicked, but there's a certain sense of like Graham was saying, like this maybe he mentioned it, maybe he didn't. This bartering, right? This trading amongst your neighbors. This I know where my food's coming from. I picked it off the tree. And now I'm getting to see that too. Like, okay, I'm having collard greens and chicken tonight. Where'd I get it? Well, I just killed a chicken and I plucked the greens, right? So it in a way, it's like I don't know what the quote unquote perfect form of government is, right? But I do know that my friends and people who love me and people in my parish always take care of me and I them.
I think actually you just reminded me. You said something about the people with the lawyer. You're not invited over to their house for dinner. And I'd actually say, well, yes, but actually no. You are kind of invited to these fake community get-togethers. Like for example, you've guys doing business deals, playing golf or whatever, and it's kind of like it actually is a kind of a quasi community.
Mm.
And it's kind of like you said, we can't shake off these I don't know what you call these mythical realities, but they are just deep rooted, maybe needs and mechanisms that kind of fulfill those needs. So, for example, to talk about boomers for a second, and this is something that I think is probably different for our generation, but I know that a lot of I would say my parents really genuinely enjoyed their place of work, and they actually really enjoyed the relationships they had with those people. But I don't know that people our age will find that. No, I don't know where I'm going with that, but basically,
I know exactly what you're talking
but
about.
but
Mm.
maybe what's happened is maybe there's been more of a fracturing basically since the 1960s or whatever of like we're all like back then for them it's like we're all working for this organization and we're all pretty much the same and we can all commune, literally be part of the same body. And even though they're not doing it as part of a church, it kind of acts as a church, and not necessarily in a bad way. But I feel like now work isn't really like that for an organization anyway, or for a company. And it can be, but it just feels a bit fake when it is. But Graham, what were you going to say there?
This is something, this is internet-based consequence here. The difference between our generation and the boomers is that the boomers almost didn't even have an avenue to discuss how it could be better, right? For them, the workforce and the way it was back in the day, it's just what it was, right? So they were having to subconsciously retrofit the human condition to these workplaces. So it's okay that they enjoyed those things. You know, I can't imagine trying to convince someone that the life they enjoy actually sucks, right? That's kind of what we're doing. That's what Gen Z is doing. We now have these open forums where we can dialogue deeply about our feelings with next to no consequence, but back in the day that wasn't possible. Right? It's the stronger social thread that our parents and their parents had. It was stronger, yes, but in a way, it was so strong that it actually contained a lot of bad things about society, right? And so it was a double-edged sword, really, to have a stronger society at that time. But that time that they had was just along the timeline of post-industrialism, right? That's just where there was a high quantity of things, there was a lot of money to go around. And so within the framework that they inherited, that was the best thing they could do. The framework's now falling apart, and at the same time, we have huge forums and a lot of anonymity to talk about what we really feel about those things. So now we're able to look back and be like, yeah, they enjoyed it, but maybe they shouldn't have. It's kind of like with monarchy. I would never say it's a good idea today, but for the time, it was good for what it was.
Right.
Same thing.
You've reminded me where I was going. So I was kind of talking about community, and as in my parents and our parents got, and I think Philip and maybe Graham, your dad's a bit different because he's in sales or whatever. But Philip, I think your mom's, well, I know she's a teacher. Maybe she feels authentic community at that school, and that's great, you know. And maybe not. It doesn't matter. We don't need to go into that specifically, but let's suppose that she does. And I want to use this to talk about something broader. So you guys, as we've discussed, are now Orthodox, and the Catholic. Uh, what's a synonym for Catholic? Well, it's universal. So, i.e., not local, right? And so I've been to Catholic things recently where it's like, and people just really need community. It's like this is some revelation. Do you know what I mean? It's like we've just realized that, that like it's been really bad. Like we've been really, I don't know, not communal and local or whatever, or that like we didn't really care about our community or whatever. And now we're just realizing how unhealthy that is. But it seems to me, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me that there's actually a way more natural, locally integrated relationship in Orthodox parishes than in Catholic parishes. That's just how it seems. And one example of that is we've discussed the Orthodox family that I knew in Memphis. Uh, and their dad was telling me if you want to receive communion at a parish on the other side of the country, you actually need to write ahead of time and get permission and basically say from your priest, it's like, hey, this guy is going to your parish, like he's a good guy and like he's good or whatever. He's not gonna ruin your parish or whatever, right? And but obviously with mass, it's like you go whenever you want, you go wherever you want, and it doesn't freaking matter. Do you know? It's all the same anyway, kind of. But obviously, there's something kind of sorry, I know I'm rambling here, but I'm gonna just say one more thing. Graham, you just said to me today that you were at a feast of some deceased parishioners, and I thought that was so cool, like that they still remember those people in a real in a real way. So can you just maybe talk about both those things, the local versus universal dichotomy as it relates to church, and also what you were talking about today with the with that local parish thing, the commemorating the deceased members of the parish.
Yeah, I've got beef with the over nationalization of the Orthodox churches, just like many people do. But I will say that one thing that it has done well is it's preserved an attitude that came from the old world, right? Which is that this is a local area, right? And so you do the memorial after Divine Liturgy for these people, and then you go into the community hall, and there are pictures of them, right, on the table. You go and look at the pictures along the long table while you pick up your food, and people, there's family members there, and it's a little bit like a feast for a saint, right? Because I found that in many cases, um, Catholic parishes are very, they're not very tight knit, and the ones that tend to be most tight knit are the reactionary ones, like the SSPX or FSSP one, where people come together because and they have that shared community because they know that they believe the same thing, right? It's such an enclave at an SSPX chapel or an FSSP church that everyone knows that they're on the same page about things.
And it's like they kind of share the same trauma as well, obviously, being isolated in the normal world or whatever as well. So that yeah, they obviously have a lot in
Yeah,
common. But it's
yeah,
not, I think what you're saying is it's not necessarily tied to actual locale, maybe as much as a local parish. But go on.
yeah, exactly. Just to be concise about it, beef with the over nationalization of these churches, but they do preserve something that we need to learn about in America, which is that we should be honoring, deceased parishioners in the way that they did at that parish. We should be doing that, and it should look like a feast. It shouldn't be relegated to just the liturgical year, right? Our lives are supposed to, uh, they're supposed to look parallel to the liturgical calendar, right? The feasts for saints, all of these things that we do are supposed to be reflected in our lives, and that's exactly what they're doing with the deceased, with the reposed parishioners. It's quasi liturgical. It's exactly what it is.
Philip, can you come in there on all of this?
Paraliturgical, actually.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like, so when I was Catholic, right, as a little kid, I would be like, "Oh, it's a feast day today. Oh boy, what do I get to do? Oh, yeah, it's just a feast day today. Oh boy, what do I get? What are we gonna do today? I don't know. What do you mean? It's like, well, you said it was a feast day. Don't I get a feast? You kind of get blank stares from the teachers. Like, wait, hold on a second. Why the hell are we in school? If it's a feast day, shouldn't we be like celebrating or something? Um, but now it's just become like right again this afterthought. Like, well, because we don't actually fast anymore, kind of get rid of the feasts, and because we can just buy food, whatever the frick we want from the grocery store at all times and places, right? It kind of loses its meaning after a while. And I think this is what sort of orthodoxy has done, at least in my local parish and other parishes that I've been a part of, right? That I've visited, even at the national, sort of more nationalistic one, like Graham was saying. I had to one Sunday I went to the Ukrainian parish down the road, and they did this after liturgy. They did this traditional Ukrainian play where they, sort of took a jab at people with longer noses. And it was funny and it was good and it was they were walking around with like purses and coins, and one of them was dressed up as the devil. So let the reader understand. So it was great. It was great fun. And at my parish, it's like we do have feast days together. We have liturgy on the feast day. People come, and then there's a meal downstairs. When it comes to I'm not saying every single Orthodox church throughout the entire world is like this, but when we go and it's like you'd have the Catholic Charities campaign at your local parish, and be like collect money for kids in Africa. It's like that's all fine and dandy, like that's wonderful. But what the hell is that doing? I don't know these kids in Africa. There's like a kid sitting there eating crayons down the street and can't his mom can't feed him. right? Yet we're sending stuff to kids in Africa. It's like, once again, it's no problem with sending stuff to kids in Africa, but the problem becomes it's like we're neglecting those who are right in front of us. So what does my parish do? Well, we prepare food and we go down into the street and give it to them and interact with them and love them and invite them in. And, every once a month we have what's called a family dinner where all the poor of the area come in and share a meal, and everybody who's able to attend comes and hangs out with them, and tries to be make conversation and show them that they have support, and that if they need anything they can always come to us, right? So it really is the mission of the church. Like Catholic, yes, it means universal, but universal in the sense of all of the faith, everything true is contained at the level of the local bishop, right? And hopefully down even into that very parish. So the fullness of the life of Christ, right? The universal life of Christ subsides, right? Exists within your own parish community. You can fully live the life of Christ within your parish community. You don't have to go to the infallible autocrat in Rome for you to live the fullness of the life in Christ, right? You go to those who are around you.
Yeah, one thing. Go on, Graham. Yeah, go ahead.
I think a lot of Catholics they rightly translate Catholicos and from the Greek to mean universal, but as Philip and I have talked about in the past, it actually more accurately means according to the whole.
Yeah.
Right. And that was understood to represent the faith. So the Catholic faith is the faith that's according to the whole. So the faith is the thing you're supposed to actually share with everyone across the world universally. Then the universal word comes into play.
Yeah.
It's the universal faith, not universal custom per se. Right. Like we've all heard the phrase like when in Rome, do as the Romans do. But everywhere is Rome now, if you're a Latin Catholic,
Yeah.
right? Everyone's doing the same thing. You do the bread thing for Saint Joseph on his feast day, but there's no local custom anymore, so people aren't grounded to where they are, to where their parish is. And Philip was talking about how the priest used to be the judge back in the day, and I read a story about that in an edition of the Catholic World from like 1918, and they put in there a diary entry from an Italian scholar who traveled to England and said that he had never seen such beauty of churches in his life, and that they rivaled the churches in the cathedral in Vienna, in Venice. But one of the mechanisms he said or one of the things that he said made it so special to be in England that they lacked in Italy is that every parish really seemed like it was its own portal to heaven.
Mm.
Each one was a portal to heaven, but each one was its own portal to heaven. And they all shared liturgy and they all shared faith, but the pews looked different. And each parishioner could look at a pew and say, yeah, that seat was built by my great 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 grandfather, or that statue was sculpted by my third cousin's wife, or something like that. And the priest was the town judge. And that's something I wish we would have, or I would have remembered back when we were talking about government and justice and all of that. But each priest was a local judge, and it was all based on the parish, right? And Louisiana still has this language, right? Parish, like a county is not a county, it's a parish.
Right.
And the center would be the church.
Philip, one of your obviously before you became Orthodox, you were a big proponent and devotee of the traditional Latin Mass, right? And this was as opposed to or aside from the Novus Ordo, right? And I remember you said something, and this seemed like so controversial or whatever, and something probably you never would have said, say, 3 or 4 years ago. But I remember you saying something about the Anglicans, like, yeah, even though they're into all this women priests and like LGBT stuff or whatever, and even though you wouldn't be a fan of maybe some of the political things in the Anglican Church, you were like, at least they have a good liturgy. As in, that's, I mean, even though they're not perfect, they're like, at least it's better than what my family are subjected to every Sunday or whatever. And that sounds like, I don't know, that might be really triggering or whatever. But I'm trying to maybe get out of you what you mean when you say something like that. And just a small anecdote which I would share is one of the reasons, as corny as it was at the start, we talked about time of the year, right? And new beginnings. And I think this podcast, actually itself is a kind of a new chapter because we haven't done it in a while. I'd love to keep doing them, right? Philip, you've gone sideways. Now you're back. Um, but what's happening at this time of the year? It's September, and I think 2 weeks ago, correct me if I'm wrong, but that would have been the harvest feast in the Anglican Church. And I actually remember I was singing in a choir a few years ago. And I remember that feast day was like there was like it wasn't a massive feast or whatever, but there was actually tea and coffee after, and like there was really nice brownies and cake and stuff. And people did actually chat. And it was this kind of relic of like a I remember I said to my mum later on that day, I said, I felt like I went back in time in that parish hall. And there is something in the Anglican, like in the Church of Ireland, presumably in the Church of England too. There does seem to be that kind of connection with the past more than you feel in these Catholic churches that are built literally during the baby boom or whatever, and they just look horrific. Um, so Philip, can you maybe talk a little bit about some of the virtues of yeah, what are the virtues of Anglicanism as you see it, as much as you maybe don't support Protestantism in general?
Well, you might have some Anglicans coming after you saying that they're not Protestant, actually. But
No,
you know,
I didn't say they're not Protestant.
no, I
I'm
would
saying that
say
they are Protestant. Sorry.
no. I'm saying there's some Anglicans that are going to come after you, claiming that they are not Protestant. In
Sorry,
fact,
I hear you. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Is that
um,
because they would say the church in England began in like 1100 or something?
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
right.
I mean, I have a friend who was an Anglican, and he'd be more apt to talk about this than I would. Maybe he's gonna, if he sees this, he's gonna bust my chops and correct me on a lot of things. Fair enough. Um, but I think there is a certain sense of which, because Anglicanism is it's kind of local, right? And that you can sort of base harvest feasts and all this off of that, right? Whereas Catholicism, to a certain degree, because they've harped on that universal thing, and that's sort of been their main point. It's like, okay, I didn't know it was a harvest feast, the harvest feast, until I went to Latin Mass, and even then, it was like, come have your things blessed, but like we're not actually going to do anything about it. Like maybe some people brought some herbs for the feast of the Dormition, maybe
And
some.
also, some people are driving 2 hours to get there. So how much of
Yeah,
a feast can you really have, you know?
yeah. What community is there? Like we would have. I remember at the Latin Mass parish I was at in South Carolina. Um, Maybe this is a story for another time because it's an amazing parish, but it's also one of the most LARPy parishes I've ever seen in my entire life. Story on that later, with involving African drums and liturgical innovations in a Latin Mass. Um, but I think because it's based on a local level, people come together and they know this is how it's always been, right? Their father went here, their mother went here, their grandparents, thus and such, dating far back, even when it was, some people, oh, that was Roman Catholic, or that was Orthodox, or whatever. Regardless, they've been at that location for however number of years, right? And have continued to do so. And they've continued these traditions, right? Whereas, like, in a lot of ways, Roman Catholicism, maybe it's like this in Europe. I'm not the only place in Europe I have great experience with is Ireland. So I can't speak for Italy or Germany or any of these other places, although they're doing clown masses in Germany and chicken dances. So I can't imagine them keeping harvest feasts and other such things. But I think like the virtue lies in the fact that they've, despite heresies and all these other wacko things you see in the major places, at the small bum country Anglican parish, that 50 people go to. They've been doing that for their entire lives, and bringing these things there. Whereas Catholicism, it's like, well, there's no harvest today in Australia, so it's not really universal. So it's not gonna feast. It's not universal for the people there because they're coming from, like you said, 2 hours away. So I think there is a benefit into these small local communities, right? Once again, I think Anglicanism is ridiculous and riddled with heresies. But there is something real that they can participate. There is something more real that they can participate in a lot of ways than some of these Roman Catholic things.
Just for the record, I'm not laughing at what Philip said. I'm laughing at Graham's goofy addition. He just sent a series of emojis.
I
Um,
was laughing at Philip's comment about Anglicanism.
right. No, I figured. Um,
I have an addition to Philip's
Go ahead.
comment actually, and this is something about, and Philip and I have actually discussed this extensively. This whole theory about England having been Orthodox, not actually in the way that we understand it, but it preserves something that Orthodoxy still preserves today. So in retrospect, it still, looks kind of Orthodox. After the Anglican schism, what happened is the See of Canterbury froze in time, and so it's still in isolation, and it's still a local seat. So it still looks a lot like these national parishes, like the Ukrainian parish Philip went to, or the Greek one that I go to, where they preserve these traditions. So there's no tension between the locale and the see that's actually governing the locale, right? So the harvest feast and all of these things, they still make sense even to this day, even though there's wacko stuff going on in the Anglican Church. It's its own see, and so you have to give it credit for that, is that it's maintained those traditions. It still has that continuity because the See of Canterbury it's over England, and that's how it's supposed to be. And so they maintain those traditions.
As I think I'm sure we could go on for longer, but I've got to be quiet. Basically, it's 9:30 here, and there are people sleeping next door. And thank you for doing this. I think to conclude, if you don't mind, I'd like to read that poem that I talked about. Corny as it may seem, but a poem by an Irish poet called Brendan Kennelly. And maybe if you just have anything to say after, we can say that, and then we'll call it a day. So let me just find this here. The reason I'm reading this is, as I said, I hope this is something of a new beginning. In the Logos broadcast, all three of us are having or have had very significant new beginnings recently. So, and also it's the kind of start of the school year, start of the academic year, and all that kind of thing. So, here goes begin. Begin again to the summoning birds, to the sight of the light at the window. Begin to the roar of morning traffic all along Pembroke Road. Every beginning is a promise, born in light and dying in dark. Determination and exaltation of springtime, flowering the way to work. Begin to the pageant of queuing girls, the arrogant loneliness of swans in the canal, bridges linking the past and future, old friends passing, though with us still. Begin to the loneliness that cannot end, since it perhaps is what makes us begin. Begin to wonder at unknown faces, at crying birds in the sudden rain, at branches stark in the willing sunlight, at seagulls foraging for bread, at couples sharing a sunny secret, alone together while making good. Though we live in a world that dreams of ending, that always seems about to give in, something that will not acknowledge conclusion insists that we forever begin. So, Graham, I suppose we'll go to you. Do you have anything? Did anything come out of that for you, or have you anything last to say before we call it a day here,
Got nothing.
Philip?
Yeah, I mean, just to give my final thoughts, it's like, all right, we talked about these varying different things: political system, sleep, blah, what the hell. I think at the end of the day, it's like what we're all looking for is that rest from something, right? Rest from the government, rest from a long day's work, right? We actually delight in it, right? And this is what the word we use in the Orthodox Church, to connect it with Graham was talking about the memorial banquet for those who had died. Right? It's this we actually long for. This is why we call death in the Orthodox Church. When we say somebody's died, we say they've reposed, right? They've fallen asleep, right? And in a way, right? We ask for a peaceful, prosperous life, right? We ask for a peaceful death in the Great Litany every time at Divine Liturgy and Vespers and all of the other liturgical services of the church. It's like, yeah, we want rest from the government. Yeah, we want rest from these people. We want rest from work, but it's like that terminates in participating in the community, in the life of the church on Sundays, right? On days of rest, right? And so I think the best way to cover this is to actually take those days seriously, because we've forgotten how to take them seriously. So if we want to start recovering whatever blue blah job we're doing, whether we work at like some bullshit job like Facebook or, a real job like me, just kidding. You have something real, right? You're living off grid in the woods, right? How do we actually recover? Well, we can start by taking those days of rest seriously. And that doesn't mean just like taking a nap. What did you do, buddy? Right? That doesn't just mean taking a nap, right? Or like, I will only work 2.5 hours before it becomes a mortal sin on Sunday. And then I will otherwise, but I can work 2 hours and 29 minutes and is it only a venial sin, right? It doesn't mean that. Right? But what is the point of rest? It's having conquered one's enemies, right? It's having done the work of creation in the world. And like, that's where we're going to find fulfillment. It's taking rest on the throne with Christ, not just like, I'm gonna lay on the couch and like scratch my belly and, eat popcorn and watch football and drink Bud Light. It's not what it's about. It's about taking that time to enjoy the things that God has given us, right? To enjoy the things that we've grown ourselves, that we've worked for ourselves, that we've, with all those around us, right? It really is sort of the perfect union of all things, right? And that's where we find rest and participation, right? Rest and renewal, right? And we can go to work, and that feeds our work, right? Like the poem was saying. So I think these new beginnings it's necessary until the very end.
Thank you, Philip. Thank you, Graham. And thank you if you made it this far. And hopefully we can do a bit better the next time. Good night.